"You're black. You disrespect my girlfriend." Billionaire accuses black waitress. What happens next? What if a single moment of misunderstanding could change two people's lives forever? In the elegant dining room of Meridian's finest steakhouse, the crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over white tablecloths and quiet conversations. 43-year-old James Patterson sat across from his girlfriend, adjusting his platinum watch nervously. He'd built his technology empire from nothing, but tonight felt different. Tonight, he was planning to propose. Their waitress, 36-year-old Carla Washington, moved gracefully between tables with the practiced ease of someone who'd been serving others for over a decade. She had kind eyes and a gentle smile that made even the most demanding customers feel welcome. As she approached James's table to refill their water glasses, she couldn't help but notice the small velvet box peeking from his jacket pocket. But sometimes, the most beautiful evenings can shatter in an instant. One misunderstood gesture, one moment of panic, and everything changes. "Where are you watching from tonight?" Carla had worked at Romano's Steakhouse for 8 years, and she prided herself on reading her customers. Tonight, the well-dressed man at table 12 seemed more anxious than usual. She'd served him before, James Patterson, the tech billionaire who always ordered the ribeye medium rare and spoke kindly to the staff. His girlfriend, a striking blonde named Catherine, appeared oblivious to his nervous energy as she scrolled through her phone. "More wine, sir?" Carla asked softly, noting how James kept patting his jacket pocket. She'd seen enough proposals in her years of service to recognize the signs. The hidden ring box, the fidgety hands, the way he kept checking his watch. James nodded absently, his mind racing through the speech he'd practiced. Catherine had been his anchor through the loneliest years of his success. She understood the pressure, the sleepless nights, the weight of employing thousands of people. Tonight, in her favorite restaurant, he'd ask her to marry him. As Carla poured the wine, Catherine finally looked up from her phone, her blue eyes sparkling in the candlelight. "You seem nervous tonight," she said with a laugh. "Big merger tomorrow?" James forced a smile. "Something like that." He reached for his water glass, his hand trembling slightly, and knocked over the wine bottle Carla had just set down. The deep red liquid spread across the white tablecloth like spilled blood, soaking Catherine's designer dress. Catherine gasped, jumping up as the wine dripped down her silk blouse. "Oh no! This dress cost $3,000. Carla immediately grabbed clean towels, her heart sinking. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. Let me help clean that up. The restaurant will absolutely pay for the cleaning, or replacement if needed." But James's mind wasn't thinking clearly. The proposal was ruined, Catherine was upset, and all he could see was the spreading stain destroying what should have been their perfect evening. In his panic and embarrassment, old buried prejudices bubbled to the surface, the kind he thought he'd left behind years ago. "You did that on purpose," he snapped at Carla, his voice louder than intended. Several nearby tables turned to look. "You people always have to find a way to disrespect." "James," Catherine interrupted, shocked by his tone. But he was beyond hearing reason. The stress of keeping his company afloat, the pressure of the proposal, and now this disaster, it all came pouring out in words he'd regret forever. "You saw my girlfriend's expensive dress and thought you'd teach us a lesson, didn't you?" Carla stood frozen, the towels still in her hands. In 8 years of service, she'd faced difficult customers, but never anything like this. She could feel every eye in the restaurant on her, could hear the whispers starting. Her heart pounded, but her voice remained steady. "Sir, I would never." "Don't lie to me," James continued, his shame making him angrier. "I know exactly what this is about." The restaurant had gone completely quiet now. Even the kitchen staff had stopped working to listen. Catherine looked mortified, sinking back into her chair. And Carla, this hard-working woman who'd just been trying to help, stood there taking verbal abuse she didn't deserve, all because a nervous man couldn't handle his own embarrassment. What none of them knew was that this moment would change everything. The silence in Romano's stretched like a taut wire. Carla's supervisor, Miguel, hurried over from across the dining room, his face tense with worry. He'd heard raised voices and seen the crowd of turned heads, never a good sign in an upscale establishment. What seems to be the problem here? Miguel asked carefully, though his protective stance near Carla made his loyalties clear. She was one of his best servers, never late, never rude, always going above and beyond for customers. James felt the weight of every stare, the judgment in every whispered conversation. Part of him knew he was wrong. Knew he was lashing out at an innocent woman because his perfect evening had crumbled. But pride and panic made him double down. "Your waitress deliberately spilled wine on my girlfriend," James said, his voice still too loud. "She saw the expensive dress and decided to make some kind of statement." Catherine tugged at his sleeve. "James, please, let's just go. It was clearly an accident." "No," he insisted, pulling away from her touch. "I won't be disrespected in a place where I spend thousands of dollars." Carla's hands trembled slightly as she folded the wine-stained towels. She thought of her 8-year-old daughter, Zoe, probably doing homework at their kitchen table right now. Of the extra shifts she'd worked to save for Zoe's school pictures. Of the customer compliments that filled her personnel file. None of that seemed to matter now. "Sir," she said quietly, "I've been serving here for 8 years. I would never intentionally spill anything on a customer. Your hand hit the bottle when you reached for your water glass. I was trying to help." Miguel nodded. "Carla is one of our finest servers. There must be some misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," James cut him off. "I saw what I saw." An elderly man at a nearby table cleared his throat. Frank Morrison, a regular customer who'd known Carla since her first day, slowly stood up with his walker. "Young man," he said, his voice carrying decades of authority, "I've watched that young lady serve with grace and kindness for years. She once stayed after her shift to help me when I fell in your parking lot. She's got more character in her little finger than you're showing tonight." Other customers began murmuring their agreement. Mrs. Henderson, who'd celebrated her last 5 wedding anniversaries at Romano's, spoke up, "Carla has never been anything but professional and sweet." But James felt cornered now, his reputation, his very identity as a successful, powerful man, under attack. "I don't care what any of you think you know. I know what happened to my girlfriend's dress." The truth was, James had grown up poor in Detroit, clawing his way to success through sheer determination. Somewhere along the way, he'd forgotten what it felt like to be vulnerable, to be judged unfairly. Tonight, in his panic and embarrassment, he'd become the very kind of person he once despised. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. Carla looked around the room at all the faces, some sympathetic, some angry, all watching her humiliation unfold. She'd faced hardship before, raised her daughter as a single mother, and worked double shifts when money was tight. But she'd never felt smaller than she did right now, holding dirty towels while a powerful man destroyed her reputation over his own mistake. What would happen next would test everyone in that room. Miguel placed a protective hand on Carla's shoulder. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice. You're disturbing our other guests." "Disturbing them?" James laughed bitterly. "I'm the one who was wronged here. I want her fired, and I want this restaurant to compensate my girlfriend for her ruined dress." Catherine stood up abruptly, her face flushed with shame. "James, stop this. Please. You're embarrassing yourself, and me, and this poor woman who did nothing wrong." "Catherine, whose side are you on?" "The side of basic human decency," she replied, her voice shaking. "I can't believe you're acting like this." Carla felt tears threatening to spill over, but she refused to cry in front of everyone. She thought about her daughter's proud smile when she'd brought her to Romano's for her birthday last month, how Zoe had bragged to her classmates that her mama worked at the fancy restaurant. Would Zoe be ashamed now if she could see this? Frank Morrison's weathered voice cut through the tension again. "Son, let me tell you something about that young lady you're attacking. Last Christmas Eve, I was eating dinner alone. My wife had passed that November. Carla noticed I was crying into my soup. She sat with me during her break, listened to me talk about Helen for 20 minutes. Didn't care that she was missing her tips, didn't care that her manager might complain. She just cared about an old man's broken heart. Mrs. Henderson nodded vigorously. She helped my grandson with his math homework while I finished my meal. Sat right there at our table, patient as could be, explaining fractions to an 8-year-old. More customers began sharing their own stories. The young mother, whose toddler had a meltdown, and how Carla had quietly brought crayons and paper. The businessman who'd left his wallet at home, and how she'd covered his meal out of her own pocket. Story after story painted a picture of kindness, of someone who went out of her way to help others. James felt something cold settle in his stomach. These weren't rehearsed testimonials, these were real people defending someone they clearly cared about. And he was the villain in every single story. Miguel looked around the room, then back at James. "Sir, I think you need to reconsider your accusations. Carla has an impeccable record, and frankly, your behavior tonight has been unacceptable." "My behavior?" James's voice cracked slightly. "I built a company worth $2 billion. I employ 30,000 people. I don't need to be lectured by restaurant staff." But even as he said it, the words felt hollow. Success in business didn't give him the right to destroy an innocent woman's dignity. Somewhere in his rage and embarrassment, he'd become someone he didn't recognize, someone his own mother would be ashamed of. Catherine grabbed her purse. "I can't watch this anymore, James. When you're ready to apologize like a decent human being, you know my number." She walked out, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor like a countdown to judgment. The restaurant door closed behind her with a soft chime that sounded like goodbye. Have you ever faced something like this? Let us know in the comments. James stood alone now, surrounded by witnesses to his shame, facing a woman whose only crime had been trying to serve him with kindness. The restaurant felt suffocatingly quiet after Catherine left. James stood there, his expensive suit suddenly feeling like a costume, his success feeling meaningless in the face of what he'd just done. Carla remained perfectly still, dignity intact despite everything, waiting for whatever would come next. Miguel cleared his throat. "Sir, I think it's time for you to leave." "You're kicking me out?" James's voice was barely a whisper now. "You've created a hostile environment for my employee and disrupted everyone's evening. Yes, I'm asking you to leave." Frank Morrison slowly made his way over to Carla. "Honey, don't you let his poison touch your heart. We all know who you are." That simple kindness broke something loose in Carla. Not tears of shame, but of gratitude for these people who'd stood up for her when she couldn't stand up for herself. "Thank you, Mr. Morrison. That means everything." James watched this moment of genuine care and felt something crack open in his chest. When was the last time someone had defended him not because of his money or power, but simply because they cared about him as a person? When was the last time he'd earned that kind of loyalty through kindness instead of demanding it through wealth? He thought about his mother, Marie Patterson, who'd worked 3 jobs to keep their family afloat in Detroit. She'd cleaned office buildings at night, just like Carla served tables. Honest work, dignified work, work that mattered. His mother would be horrified by what he'd just done. "Wait," James said as Miguel approached with the bill. His voice was different now, smaller. "Please wait." The room held its breath. Carla turned to look at him, and for the first time all evening, James really saw her. Not as a target for his frustration, but as a person. A woman with kind eyes and calloused hands, someone who'd probably faced more real challenges than his carefully insulated world had ever presented him. James stopped, struggling with words that felt foreign in his mouth. "I need to tell you something." Carla waited, her posture straight but not defensive. She'd learned long ago that angry people usually burned themselves out if you gave them enough rope. "My hand hit that wine bottle," James said quietly. "You were trying to help, and my hand knocked it over. I saw it happen. I knew it was an accident." The admission hung in the air like smoke. Several customers leaned forward, straining to hear. "Then why?" Carla asked simply. James closed his eyes. Because I was scared. And embarrassed. And instead of dealing with those feelings like a man, I took them out on you. And that's—" His voice broke slightly. "That's unforgivable." Miguel stepped closer, sensing the shift in the room's energy. Even the kitchen staff had gathered in the doorway, drawn by the drama unfolding in their dining room. If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. "I need to make this right," James continued, his eyes finding Carla's again. "I don't know how, but I need to try." For the first time all evening, Carla's expression softened just slightly. Not forgiveness, that would have to be earned, but perhaps the beginning of understanding that the man standing before her might be different from the one who'd attacked her moments ago. James reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the small velvet box that had started this entire mess. He stared at it for a long moment, then looked up at Carla with clear eyes. "This was supposed to be the night I proposed to Catherine," he said quietly. "I was so nervous about doing it right, about making it perfect, that when things went wrong, I lost myself completely. But that's not an excuse for what I did to you." Carla's expression remained guarded, but she listened. "My mother raised me better than this," James continued. "She worked 3 jobs when I was growing up, cleaning offices, serving food, just like you do. She taught me that every person deserves respect, regardless of what they do for a living or what they look like. Tonight, I dishonored everything she taught me." Frank Morrison nodded approvingly from his table. "Now you're talking sense, son." James turned to Miguel. "What's the procedure for filing a formal apology? I want this on record. I want everyone to know that Carla Washington is exactly what these people say she is, a professional who was wronged by a customer who couldn't handle his own emotions." Miguel looked surprised but pleased. "I can document that, sir. And Catherine's dress," James continued. "Of course I'll replace it. But more than that." He paused, looking around the room at all the faces that had defended Carla. "I want to do something meaningful. Not to buy forgiveness, I don't deserve that yet, but because it's right." Carla spoke for the first time in several minutes. "What did you have in mind?" "A scholarship," James said without hesitation. "For your daughter, or other children like her. Education was my way out of poverty. Maybe it can be theirs too." Mrs. Henderson dabbed at her eyes with her napkin. "Now that's more like it." Carla studied James's face, looking for sincerity. She'd been serving people long enough to tell when someone was performing versus when they meant what they said. What she saw in his eyes wasn't the arrogant billionaire who'd attacked her 20 minutes ago, but someone who'd been genuinely humbled by his own behavior. "That would be significant," she said carefully. "But I need you to understand something. An apology doesn't erase what happened. My coworkers will remember this night. Some customers will too. You can't unsay those words." "I know," James replied. "And I'll have to live with that. But maybe I can make sure they remember how it ended, not just how it began." 3 months later, the Patterson Foundation announced its first annual service industry scholarship program, awarding college funds to children of restaurant, hotel, and retail workers. The first recipient was Zoe Washington, age 8, for her future educational needs. Carla still works at Romano's, still serves with the same grace and kindness that made everyone defend her that night. And James? He learned that real power isn't the ability to intimidate others, it's the courage to admit when you're wrong and the commitment to do better. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Sometimes the most important moments happen when we're forced to see ourselves clearly. Thank you for joining us on this journey of forgiveness and growth.